We are thrilled to have Peter Thiel on with us. He is the author of the book 0 to 1, Notes on Startups or How to Build the Future. You might know him. You definitely know some of the things that he's been involved with. In 2004, he's the guy who came across a sophomore who had never had a steady job before and gave him $500,000 to start something called the Facebook. Since then, his founders fund has included LinkedIn, which I want to talk to you about. It pisses me off. Spotify, SpaceX, and so much more. He's also done 20 Under 20, which he launched in 2010. 20 young techies are given $100,000 if they'll drop out of school to launch a startup. He gets a lot of trouble for that. I think it's absolutely fantastic. But he's also a libertarian who started out as a real Reagan guy, who then went to college, tried to change it from the inside, and as I understand it, kind of realized none of this is really working. Is that right, Peter?
It's very hard to reform things from the inside in general. Yeah, we started one of these conservative student newspapers, the Stanford Review, in the late '80s, early '90s. There were all these debates that were very important about Western civilization, the humanities. The colleges were overwhelmingly liberal. There was a lot that was screwed up, but very hard to reform from the inside. And I think this is true of a lot of our institutions. They're important, and so we always try to reform them from within. But they're at a point where that one often gets a sense that that's a fool's errand of one sort or another.
We were talking off the air here before we started about politics, and I want to talk to you a little bit about this. But since we're here at education, everybody's afraid of letting things go. You know, I'm here. We are sitting in this studio, and I just told you were marking in the studio, and I said, yeah, well, we bought it with just enough that would cover what we would have paid in rent for 5 years because I want to be able to walk away from it because I don't know what tomorrow looks like. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to keep building what we're building, and we'll just go with the flow on technology and everything else. But that is, I think, important to not have the fear of letting things go. Right now, you don't have to do education the way we're doing education, but because the system is set up, and the buildings and everything else is set up a certain way, you got to do it that way. Let it go.
No, it looks no different from the way it looked in the 19th century for the most part.
Right.
And if you define technology as doing more with less, education in the U.S. is the opposite. The costs of college education are up 400% after inflation since 1980. And so it's something where you're getting less for more rather than more for less. It's the most anti-technological sector of our economy. Healthcare is pretty bad. Education's even worse. So these are the government-linked sectors like education, healthcare are the ones that are the furthest from innovation, from change, from doing newer, better things.
How do we change that?
Well, the bias for many decades among conservatives and libertarians has been that you try to reform things from within. You get more conservative faculty. You try to bring things under control, but there's very little accountability. And so I think change happens by creating alternative routes on the outside. And I think, and I've talked a lot about an education bubble in the United States. The analogy that I've used is that I think it's like where the Catholic Church was in 1514, 500 years ago. It's a unitary system, a universal system that tells, and in some ways the universities are the successor of the Catholic Church. They're sort of an atheist church, you could say. And they are costing more and more. You pay more and more for these indulgences. They're paying for this professorial or priestly class of people. And what I think is going to, what is going to happen at some point is that there's going to be a reformation, and it will come from the outside. And it's very hard for us to see it right now because we can't imagine anything different. We believe you will only be saved if you go to college.
I can't imagine that holding up. I see that system and I think to myself, I don't understand why anybody thinks this works, why anybody thinks this is a good idea. You know, I mean, look, there's some things you've got to go to college, and you know, I personally, you know, when you are excited about learning, that's when you should go to college. Not when you're like, I got to check this box so I can. That's not when you go to college,
right? But it's but I think most people aren't yet where you are, Glenn, or where I am. Most people are scared of the future, and when you're scared of the future, you often retrench. And that gets taken advantage of. Okay, and that's why the millennials are graduating with, they have $1 trillion in student debt now, and so
soon that will be personally.
Well, you can't get out of it. The bankruptcy laws have been rewritten, so student debt can't be discharged even if you go personally bankrupt.
That's crazy.
And so these people they'll have their Social Security checks garnished when they retire to pay off their student loans.
So how do we get people, Peter? Because I've had a real change of heart. I have been a fan of Ray Kurzweil's for a long, long time. He's probably next to you, the hardest I've ever worked to get an interview. I've waited for you for, I don't even know how long we've tried. 6 years. 6 years we've tried to get an interview with you. The same thing with Ray Kurzweil.
This better be worth it, by the way.
Yeah, it's not going well so far, is it? But the same thing with Ray Kurzweil. I tried for almost 10 years to get Ray Kurzweil. And I am so excited about the future. At the same time, I am terrified by what could be done if we lose our ethics and our principles, and there aren't a lot of people that are doing that. When I went out to Silicon Valley, and this was recently, and I met with Mark Andreessen and some of his people out there, and just spent a couple of days out there just looking at what the future holds. I had a whole bunch of hope. I walked out going, okay, all right, you know what? We might make it. But how do you get people to go from, holy cow, everything I know is about to change, to, and that's okay?
Well, we have to always understand the future is not this thing that just is absolute and that exists. And this is one place where I actually slightly disagree with Kurzweil, because Kurzweil always portrays the future as just these exponential curves. When he says the singularity is near, it's like you're saying all you have to do is sit back and eat some popcorn and watch this movie called The Future happen. And I don't think it's like that at all. I think the future it's open-ended. It's up to us to determine. And so I'd like us to talk more about human agency and a little bit less about the future as this thing that simply is going to happen. And so
that's what gives me. I'm torn on this, because that's what gives me real trepidation on the future. Is I look at the way people are just falling into a self-induced coma. They are unplugging. They are just taking the least path of resistance. They don't want to think. They don't want to feel, And that's going to lead us into very bad places with technology.
Well, certainly if you don't think about the future, if you pretend that you can't do anything about the future, then the future will still happen.
Correct.
It always will happen, but it will be a bad future. And so I do think we have to sort of break this defeatist cycle where if you're a slacker with low expectations, they will be fulfilled. That's So
how do we break that?
Well, it's I don't have a great answer for what you do for the culture as a whole. So I'm always focused on trying to get small groups of people to break it. And this is why I'm so focused on technology, on starting new companies, because you can convince small numbers of people to try to do new things. When my colleague Elon Musk started SpaceX from PayPal, it's getting 20 rocket scientists and convincing them we could go to Mars. And then you sort of work on this over, a decade. And I think, they're going to get to Mars in 10 or 20 years if Elon gets his way. And that's how I think that's where I tend to be most focused. There is a big problem with the broader culture in this country. Where I think generationally a lot of the millennials are pessimistic about the future, and it has a self-fulfilling aspect that's very bad. But you try to break it one person at a time.
Where are you on what's coming? Because you're one of the most fascinating people I have ever read anything about, because you are in almost all ways, seemingly on the surface, diametrically opposed to yourself.
Well, I'm both optimistic and pessimistic. So I'll start with that contradiction. I think it's I think we could be doing much better than we think. So I think there's tremendous potential, not just in computers and information technology, but also in many other areas. We could be curing cancer. There's no reason we could not be curing Alzheimer's, dementia. All these things we could be working on.
Why aren't we?
Well, why question? Any question that starts with why is always hard to answer. But I think I think we've had a lot of failure over the last 40 years, where the story of the last 40 years has been one of relative stagnation, where we've had progress in computers and less progress in all other areas. And I think and I think one simple libertarian cut on this is that computers were not regulated and everything else was regulated. It costs you $100,000.
It's a great point.
It costs you about $100,000 to start a new software company. Mm-hmm. It costs you about $1 billion with a B dollars to get a new drug through the FDA. And so we have a lot of new software companies.
So
not that many new drugs.
Very few people are capable of doing that.
It's all of these. Quite honestly, anytime the government gets involved, it stifles everything. There's no reason. I mean, look, we're trying to do at the Blaze. This is the most antiquated system I've ever seen in my life. And here we are. We're spending money actually trying to lobby Washington to stop the merger from Time Warner and what is it? Comcast. And trying to stop that. That goes against everything in me. But it's already a regulated system. It's rigged. You can't get in. I can't start a Comcast. And we're not at the point yet to where that thing's going to break apart. But I know, and I'd love to hear you answer this, and we don't have to answer this on the air. I'd love to know, when does this system fall apart? When does access to information stop going through people like Comcast? Because there are these damn gatekeepers, and it's because they can run to the government, and the government will say, I'll protect you. You protect me, I'll protect you. And it's in every single industry.
Well, I think there is sort of this relentless trend towards more transparency, more information, and it seems hard for me to stop that. There are things our government was able to get away with in, say, the Kennedy, Johnson, or Nixon administrations. It can't get away with anymore.
Ooh.
And so when you see what's going on in the sausage making factory, you may go on a strict vegan diet.
Except we see it now. If they couldn't have gotten away with it because we couldn't see it, but now society is such a way that we see it and we don't care. That's worse, because now we are seeing through we're seeing right through them, aren't we?
To some extent, but I think I describe myself politically as libertarian, although temperamentally I'm something of a political atheist, where to some extent I just don't believe that these people are as holy and great as they're often made out to be, and I think the internet is.
Who's making them out to be great? Because I haven't met them in quite some time.
Well, they are making themselves out to be great for the most part.
Yes.
And that's a much harder stunt to pull off today than it was 40 or
true. Total disconnect from the American people.
There's what FDR did in the New Deal. I don't think you can do that today.
We'll come back in just a second. I want to talk to you about, you said that America stopped innovating quite some time ago, and you also say that Apple is not an innovative company. A fascinating theory on Apple when we come back here in just a second. Our sponsor this half hour is Cheaper Than Dirt. Cheaper Than Dirt has dropped their prices now on 10,000 popular firearms. Now is the time. I mean, everybody, after the election, everybody ran out and bought guns and ammunition and everything else. Well, what happened is these companies started making all the firearms and all the ammunition, and now there's this huge glut. So cheaper than dirt. On 10,000 of the most popular firearms, now you can get the best deal that they have ever had on guns in perhaps forever. Cheaperthandirt.com. Best time to buy guns, ammunition, the price, selection, great service available at cheaperthandirt.com.
The Glenn Beck Program.
The Blaze Radio Network.
Glenn Beck.
Back with Peter Thiel. He is the author of 0 to 1, Notes on Startups or How to Build the Future. He'll be with me for a full hour tonight at 5 o'clock on The Blaze. You don't want to miss this show. We have so much to talk about. I want to talk a little bit about politics and business and big business. But I want you to explain your theory that America has not really been an innovative country for quite some time.
Well, we've been innovative in computers, internet, mobile internet, not in a lot of other areas, and it's reflected by our reduced expectations for the future. Living standards went up tremendously in the 19th century, in the 20th century, through the 60s, and something in this country I think really did break in the 1970s. There was a bit of a revival with Reagan in the 80s. The 90s were a pretty good decade.
What broke?
Well, I think I think environmentalism became very powerful, regulations became very powerful, and all these industries that were that try to do things in the world of atoms, transportation, energy, these all became bad fields to go into, and so engineering became a bad thing to study. If you're a nuclear engineer, aerospace engineer, there were no jobs for people who went into these fields because these industries were basically regulated to death.
I watched Man in Space, a program put together by Walt Disney in 1955, and that took me to something that he did, The Atom and Me. And you watch this, and there is no way that would be produced today. Nothing like it probably for the last 20 years, because it's talking about how great the future is because of the atom and what we can do and clean energy and endless energy and all of these ideas that are just you can't do now because of regulation.
Well, if you look at there's a regulatory story. There's a cultural story too, where if you look at the science fiction movies that get made today, they all show a future that's just frightening and terrible, and you can choose between the Terminator or Matrix or Avatar or Elysium. I watched the Gravity movie last year, and you'd never want to go into outer space. You'd want to be back on a muddy island on this planet because technology is something that doesn't work, or it's dystopian, it kills people, it's destructive. And so we've somehow shifted from being hopeful about the future to being fearful. We landed on the moon in July of 1969. Woodstock started 3 weeks later, and I think with the benefit of hindsight, that's perhaps when progress stopped and the hippies more or less took over the country.
I have to tell you, I when I was at Fox, I did a whole special on that summer, on that theory, that's the split in our nation. That's where our nation made a choice. You could either reach for because there were two entirely different cultures. You could either reach up and reach beyond, or you could roll around in the mud. And for a while, I think we thought that the stars won, but I don't think they did. I think that went underground for a while.
No, it's been a long time. We don't want to admit that the failure happened. So you had the space shuttle program, which sort of somehow extended the space program by 30 years.
Right.
And you'd never want to decommission it, because as soon as you decommission it, you admit that there's really been a retreat.
Back in just a minute.
This is the Glenn Beck Program.
We're talking to Peter Thiel. He is the author of 0 to 1, also the guy who gave the original investment to a guy named Mark, who started something called the Facebook. and started PayPal, and now is one of the bigger angel investors, if you will, in the world, and looking for innovators in technology that are going to actually change things. You're not really looking for somebody with a new app.
Well, you want to do things where if you didn't do it, it wouldn't happen.
Right.
So I always, science starts with the number 2, with things that are repeatable. And so people are always looking for a formula. They're looking for repeatable formulas. But I think every moment in business happens only once. The significant things are unique and singular, and everything I think that really matters in this world is one of a kind.
So let's go there. I want to talk to you a little bit about competition that you talk about in the book, but I also want to talk a little bit first about Apple not really being an innovative company.
Well, it had an enormous run of innovation under Jobs for decades and decades. But it is very hard to maintain innovation once you get that big. Once you're making $150 billion a year from selling iPhones, it's hard to come up with any new vertical that competes with it. So I think it has the same problem any of these large companies have. Companies get bureaucratic, they get stagnant. I think Tim Cook is doing as good a job as he can filling impossibly large shoes, but often the innovation is driven by the founders. The founders are important. The founders set the tone for these companies, and once they leave, it's often hard for that to persevere. There's sort of an analogy I draw, and maybe it's overdone, with the founders of companies and the founders of our country. When you found something, you have tremendous freedom. You can sort of set all the parameters, and then often the people who come afterwards have much less ability to change things, or you're sort of caught up in these structures of one sort or another.
It's kind of like things become sacred. I mean, I look in business. You saw this with Disney when he died. Who's going to fill those shoes? And what would Walt do? And for a long time, we did that with the founders. What would Washington do? Now we don't really even care what the founders did. And there's some place in between of, well, I'm not George Washington, and I'm not living in his time, but I can take his principles, and we've just gotten rid of the principles even and flush them down the toilet.
You want to always keep it alive. You want to keep it. You want to keep the founding alive, and so there's always a degree to which, if you are too doctrinaire, you've lost something, and of course, if you've forgotten about it, you've lost something too. So you have to always be somewhere in between.
Talk to me about the competition, because you talk a little bit about competition in the book, and that competition is not a good thing per se.
Well, you have to always distinguish two different versions of this. One is as advice to someone who's an entrepreneur or a founder or someone who's starting something, and then there's always the question about society. But if you're starting a business, you want to have a monopoly. You want to be doing something where it's one of a kind. You don't want to have the 4th online pet food company. You don't want to have the 10th thin film solar panel company. You don't want to be opening the 1,000th restaurant here in Dallas. You want to be doing something that if you were not doing it, nobody would. So like your show is one of a kind. If you weren't doing it, nobody would be saying the things you're doing. And that's what makes it valuable. And so in that sense, you have a monopoly on a certain set of ideas.
So how do you then make because
are you in
my
favor of
show's
regulating that, or are you let the marketplace work that out?
I think it's bad if these monopolies are static, like in the Parker Brothers board game, where they become toll collectors like a troll on a bridge. And I think they become static, in fact, when they are regulated. When the government gets involved,
Yes, okay.
It often ends up backing the monopolies in one way or the other.
Correct.
So the post office is a bad monopoly. I think Comcast has some problems.
Yeah.
But I think in technology, the monopolies are not permanent. They last for a few decades. You have a great run, and that's the reward you get for coming up with something new.
Are you concerned at all about, like, for instance, when I talked to Eric Schmidt, I said, "So, Eric, you're going into artificial intelligence, and you're partnering with the government on some things, and you're becoming so big. I don't know which one fears the other. Does the government fear you, or do you fear the government, or are you guys both in it together?" And he said, well, those things will never happen because of our culture. And I said, do you mean don't be evil? And he said, yeah, I mean, our culture from our founding is just too strong of a culture. We'll never go dark. I don't believe that. And I told him I don't believe that for a second. Human nature, everything falls apart in the end. It's very hard to keep standards, especially when your culture is a negative. Don't be evil. How about being for something instead of being against? Are you concerned about the size of companies like Google and what they can do in the future? Not necessarily Google specific.
Well, I'm always more concerned about the government. So if you ask me which is more powerful, Google or the government, it's hands down the U.S. government. And so yes, there are. I think the "Don't be evil" slogan is kind of fake. And if you're suspicious, you'd actually be always nervous if someone had a slogan like that. You sort of start thinking, maybe there's something really dark going on if you have to cover it up with a slogan like that. But
just a reminder, everybody, today, don't be evil.
But it's sort of like you sort of suspect maybe the slogan is something like "Do a little bit of evil and don't get caught" or something like that.
Right.
What was your involvement with LinkedIn? Did you start LinkedIn? Did you co-found?
No, I was just an early investor.
Distance yourself.
I was just an early investor. A good friend of mine.
How could you do that?
Founder.
You're a guy who you don't take business cards from people, right? Somebody comes up to you and hands you a card. You don't like that.
Well, I take them. I don't. It doesn't. You always get overwhelmed with people pitching you on proposals on one sort or another.
Yes.
So you have to.
So you take them in, but they end up in a circular file.
They end up somewhere.
Yeah. Okay, all right. So how could you have been a guy who helped with LinkedIn? It is the bane of our existence.
Why is it the bane of your existence?
Oh my gosh,
we get
because we don't even know
LinkedIn requests a day,
and we don't know
how to stop it.
We don't know how to get out of the system. I swear I never signed up for the damn system.
You don't have to engage. You can always just not do anything.
And yet it keeps coming. It's relentless.
Stop.
LinkedIn is the most relentless.
His wife asked me to sign up in
accidentally pushed
LinkedIn,
the wrong button,
and,
and she asked every human being on earth to
and now
join
I'm
her.
getting...
Well,
Jackie wants to know why you haven't done this. Jackie wants to know, are you a bad human being? Jackie wants to know, are you Amish or something? Why won't you sign up with LinkedIn?
Well, but look, let's focus on the positive part here. We are in an economy that's a networked economy, which means that the relationships you build with people are unbelievably important over time. And so
it sounds like a guy who's still making money from that damn LinkedIn.
Well, no, but I'm not even invested in it anymore. But I think they tapped into something.
Is that what you're saying?
It's done more good than evil.
All right.
No, it hasn't done evil. We're not accusing it of evil.
It's just obnoxious.
It's
done a lot of obnoxious.
Just leave me alone, LinkedIn. Just leave me alone. I don't want to be LinkedIn.
Can you unsign or unsubscribe or
maybe,
get off somewhere?
This may be below his pay grade.
It might be. Yes, it might be.
You just don't have to do anything.
Well,
all right.
Yeah, well, that's the opposite advice you gave about the future. You said if we don't do anything, the future arrives. If we do nothing, we're going to be sucked into the LinkedIn nightmare.
Well, I was like, don't do anything in general. Just don't do anything in particular in certain areas.
All right. Okay. Back in just a second with Peter Thiel. The name of the book, 0 to 1, Notes on Startups or How to Build the Future. He's going to be on with me at 5 o'clock today. And we're gonna go over a little bit. I want to talk to you just a little bit here when we come back about politics in particular. But we're going to talk a little bit about just about everything. If you are an entrepreneur, the world is changing so dramatically, and everybody wants to put you into a little box. What he has to say about boxes and not being put into a little box, in fact, don't follow a roadmap. I believe everybody who wants to succeed in tomorrow's world, today's world, needs to listen to it. Today at 5, or you can pick up the book 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. The sponsor of this half hour is Goldline. Goldline is a company that I've been doing business with for a long, long time. In fact, I was an investor in theirs before they were an investor in anything that I did. I went to Goldline right after September 11th, and people mocked and said, "Oh, gee, gold is $300 an ounce. That's crazy." Look at it now. It's not something that is for everybody. It's I have no idea what the future holds. Peter might know. He's the guy with PayPal. How long does the dollar last?
It's a race to the bottom among all the different forms of fiat money. So it's going to do better than the euro, better than the yen. But
it has no long-term future. Do you think? Do you see that dollar? Do you see me retiring at 65, 70 years old and saying, "Hey,
it's the center of the government bubble. It's the center of the bubble today is government. We had a bubble in tech in the 90s, housing finance in the 2000s. Today, the bubble is centered on government, quantitative easing, money printing, and this is somehow the center of the bubble. And so you don't want to be in cash. You don't want to be in bonds. It's hard to know what to do instead because that's the natural default people have. But I think that's what you want to stay away from. It was like just in the last decade, the one thing you should have done is stay away from housing. It was hard to know. People had no idea what to do instead, so they went into housing.
Right.
Today, you want to stay away from cash and bonds.
Anyway, so call Goldline today. It's not right for everybody. It may not be right for you. Call 1-866-GOLDLINE, 1-866-GOLDLINE, or goldline.com.
The fusion of entertainment and enlightenment. This is the Glenn Beck Program.
The Blaze Radio Network.
Okay, Pat, let it go. Let it go.
All I did was suggest that we bring our troops home and surround LinkedIn. That's all I suggested.
Peter Thiel is definitely unorthodox military policy here.
Yes.
I'm actually for that more than I am our troops remaining in South Korea.
At least it's a domestic
I'm not in favor of them
policy.
surrounding LinkedIn, but I'm relatively speaking for that as well.
All right. Never thought you'd meet anybody that was so really, really opposed to LinkedIn, did you? When you helped throwing you a little bit?
I'll just take it that you're really, really opposed to having the troops in the Middle East.
Yes.
Well,
That's
you could
part
look
of it.
at it that
That's
way.
part of it.
You live in that little world of yours, Peter, but that's not what we're saying. Let me talk a little bit about politics here, just a little bit with you. When we went into the break, we were talking about the monetary system. How long do you think we have before this system just implodes? This game we're playing, where we're not making any sense.
Yeah, it's amazing. They've been able to do it for 6 years already. We've had money printing, quantitative easing for 6 years, and so no one is actually saying. You watch CNBC and they're like, "Oh, well, it's not going to. We'll find a way to work it." That's never worked out. Now there's a slow impoverishment that's happening when you have interest rates at 0%. The inflation's still 2% a year. So over the course of 6 years, it's like you've confiscated 12% of people's money. It's like what the government of Cyprus did. They confiscated 10% overnight. We've done it more slowly, but we've had a Cyprus-level confiscation in the U.S. over the last 6 years.
That's an amazing way to look at it.
I've never even thought of it that way.
Yeah.
And so there isn't that much inflation, but there still is enough that it's slowly eroding things. I suppose it ends when inflation starts to pick up, and it doesn't have to pick up much for it to really hurt, because in the 70s, when you had a lot of inflation, you still had high interest rates. So you had 8% inflation, you earned 8% in your bank account, you sort of roughly broke even. If inflation just goes to 3 or 4% in the U.S. and you're earning zero, then you're really hurting.
And there's a lot of people who think it's going to go a lot higher than that. A lot higher
Well,
than 3
there's
or
also
4%.
people that say that massive deflation is coming.
It's the thing, conservatives and libertarians, I think, overpredicted inflation the last few years. It didn't quite happen. But I think the mistake they made was they underestimated how busted the economy was. And so we haven't had inflation because we've had all this regulation. You can't do anything. There's been not enough economic activity. And so I think if we actually ever get a real recovery going, that's when you hit inflation right away.
Well, that was the problem, because I talked to Art Laffer. This is years ago, just before we started the money printing, and I said, Art, they're going to start printing money. And he said, Glenn, if they start printing money, then we're in trouble, and we have to raise the interest rates at a certain point. I said, at what point are the raising of the interest rates irrelevant? Because you'll cripple the economy to try to suck that money back in. You can't raise them high enough. You'll cripple the economy.
Yeah, it's hard to know exactly. We don't know exactly how this ends, but there's a sense this ends badly. I think it can keep going for a few more years, would be my guess. I think the Fed at this point, the majority of the governors are Democrats. They're going to do everything they can to push easy money to help Hillary Clinton get elected in 2016. But I would predict that if she wins, she will be a one-term president because
it will break no matter.
It will break, and this is almost the.
Will it break no matter who is president?
I sort of think that you might not want to win 2016 because I think they can't keep it going for 6 more years, no matter what. I don't think you can keep it going for 6 more years. And we want the silver lining to Clinton presidency will be that there will be clarity, that it will be because of their set of policies that's brought this about. It's a very high price.
Is there anybody? How much time do we have? Oh, we have 30 seconds.
30
well,
seconds.
I was going to ask you. Well, I'll get you out of this one for now, but maybe we'll answer it at 5. If there's anybody on the horizon politically that you see that gives you any kind of hope out there, but we're out of time now. So,
I'm glad we're out of time.
0 to 1, Peter Thiel. The name of the book, 0 to 1. Pick it up, bookstores everywhere, and join us at 5 o'clock on theblaze.com.